It's Daz. This week's video is a bit different than other videos I've been doing about current events or anything supernatural. And I want to talk about something that's really important and is more of a word of encouragement or a life lesson. And I'm using my experience as the template for it, and that is how to walk away, planning an exit strategy, maintaining healthy boundaries. And I'm going to use a few different examples because I feel like it can relate to something that someone listening could be going through. Walking away sounds easy because in all of our minds we want to be free and we want to be strong. But the question is, when you are in a situation where you've invested time, energy, money, whether it's building a relationship with somebody or working at a job or living in a place, you may not have the finances, you may not have the access to resources, you may feel scared to be alone, to walk away. And anytime I was faced with that kind of challenge, I always found myself going back and forth, sometimes trying to make excuses for what I was going through. So for instance, one of my most recent examples of walking away was actually my living situation. So me and my husband were staying in an apartment in St. Joseph, and the rent was cheap. And cheap rent, equals usually problems. And the place definitely had its problems. And every time something would get worse, whether it was discovering black mold, because it was an older building, like built in the early 1900s. St. Joe has a lot of old buildings. Or we saw too many insects, or we saw drain flies and the worms. We would constantly keep rationalizing, well, the rent is so cheap. The average American rent today is like $2,000, and look, it's only $700 or whatever. And it was like $900 most of the time because the landlord let him stretch the deposit out. But the point I'm making is we were trying to rationalize the cheap pay and having more money in our pockets to eat or travel or do whatever we wanted to do. But the conditions were not getting any better. And when I hit a breaking point there, I finally told him, I was like, we're not going to renew it for December. We need to move. And he was like, okay. And we found an apartment that was honestly better for our health. We were constantly working out, trying to train for our peak, San Jacinto and the Cactus to Clouds route, which is one of the hardest day hikes. And we had done Pikes Peak, which was a 14er in Humphreys. And living in that apartment in those conditions, you could train all you want. You could eat healthy all you want. We had a bunch of gnats constantly everywhere we went because we were in a converted crawl space practically. And apparently I learned later from the landlord when they came out for pest control that that building used to be abandoned when they purchased it. And there were rats in the building. And they lived near sewers and pipes, and how they fixed everything. And since I was at the bottom, great, maybe they'll return. So yeah, that was enough for me to say no. But now I was fortunate enough where both of us had jobs and we both had income, and we had a little bit saved that we could take and use it for our move. And we moved closer to the city where we had more family and more amenities, since we were going rock climbing all the time and having to drive an hour. But we had to weigh the one sacrifice, which is his job was still over in St. Joe, hence why we were in St. Joe to begin with. He was willing to compromise that 1 hour of driving to get out of that situation. And I can't imagine if we continued to stay there, because even we weren't getting enough sunlight. There was only one window in there, and my eyes were starting to go dim. I got damage to my eyes when I did my first peak because I didn't wear sunglasses. We were at 14,000 feet. The UV rays are strong. I got my first sunburn I've ever had in my life. And a lot of it, I feel was because I was sitting in the dark constantly. And then I worked from home, so I was spending more time in that apartment than I was anywhere else, and it wasn't great conditions. So that was one example. Another example I'll give that was recent was whenever I left my last job. So I've had multiple jobs, and I've worked at the same company now almost 5 years. And within that company, I've moved roles now. This is my third role within the company. And every time I've left a role, I've done it because I realized it was no longer serving me, whether there was no room for growth, I was being mistreated, and finding a new job is not easy. I'm going to say that up front. When I was looking for new roles, I was not being successful with any of it. And it took me about a year to get a new role. And I really had to get out of my comfort zone with reaching out to people and figuring out like if I could level up my skills, whether it's doing certificates, it's studying the market, whatever the case is. And I decided like if I'm going to have a new role, I want it to be remote because I was traveling for work nonstop. And that travel sounds fun until it's not fun, until you get stuck at an airport. So there's flight delays. And then you got to deal with not ever seeing any of your family or friends, being in beds and dealing with all kinds of... I've dealt with a lot of weird stories I could tell you about traveling. Also, I just felt undervalued in my role. Like, there had been 2 years and no raise and no recognition. Meanwhile, there were people that were being promoted who I didn't really see doing that much more than anyone else. They were just in the little clique of managers. And so seeing all of that made me realize I needed an exit plan. So my exit plan in that case was level up my skills, start reaching out to different hiring managers and HR people, ask people who are recruiting for the job, what does this job entail, and try to relate to them, send them your resume. It was hard. I got over I feel like I got 1,000 rejections because I applied inside the company, outside the company. I know I got it rejected within the company at least over 100 times. And the other issue I was running into is within our company, they were really adamant about not letting people from my particular old role move into the other role. But one thing I did kind of like when we moved out of the other apartment is I kept my mouth shut. I moved in silence because unfortunately we live in a world where when you overshare your plans to do something, it seems like it gets sabotaged or people start preying upon your downfall. Like they are literally hoping that you don't succeed. So I knew if I want a good apartment or if I want a better job, I'm going to have to move in silence. Whether that's moving in silence about saving money, moving in silence about apartment hunting, moving in silence about job hunting, moving in silence about giving the resume out. And I literally kept my mouth shut up to the point where the only reason other people found out was my last week or two is because they put my name on the calendar and there was a white line showing I was leaving. And then people were like, oh, you're leaving? But yeah, that whole experience was eye-opening. But I was happy to walk away from being mistreated because also I was going to go lives and sometimes I'd be there and I didn't feel like they were really setting me up for success. More than anything, I felt like I was being set up for failure and humiliation when you expect me to cover an area where I hardly ever cover it. And I'm supposed to be the subject matter expert. You're not giving me enough resources. Or having my hours so it looks like I'm going to work overtime and I'm doing all these 12s in a row, but then they give me one day off. But I got to go back to work the next day and they cut the week so that maybe I only got 4 to 8 hours of overtime. And I was working holidays. It was ridiculous. And then another recent example I'll give, well, it's not that recent anymore, but I'll give it from when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend back in 2020, not married happily, but when that situation happened, I talked a little bit about it on the channel back in 2020/2021, and I was heartbroken. That relationship was not honestly as serious as it could be because he was not taking the relationship seriously, and I saw the red flags. And now that I'm older, mature, and I can be honest with myself, and now I'm married, I can say that that was honestly doomed from the start. But I realized the red flags. I had to get out of my stages of denial, which was hard because nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to start over, especially when you feel like, oh, I'm never going to find anyone like this person. I don't want to start over. And everything's 2020 in hindsight. And when I prayed about things, but I really listened to God about it. He made it clear this is not the right person for me. This person was not even another Christian. I was unequally yoked. And I could feel myself slipping because one of the worst things you can do for yourself is be with the wrong person. And honestly, I feel like he was pulling away anyways, which actually was a good thing, a blessing in disguise. He wasn't being truthful about the fact he was pulling away. And this is something I've learned across the board with all these examples. It's like with the living situation I was in. When the landlords came over and told that story about pest control or the way they would minimize it showed me they didn't value us as tenants. And they felt like, well, this is how it is. You just got to accept it. And then when I was on the coaching team and, the second year of no raises, and they would blame it on the acquisition that happened prior. And the acquisition could have something to do with it, but they also clearly didn't value me at all. And, they'd be like, it's not about performance, but then they basically said it was about performance. And so when people show you they don't value you, whether it's as an employee, as a coworker, as a significant other, as a tenant, as a customer, it tells me that it's time for me to withdraw or look other places. And that's essentially what was happening in all these situations. And when I was getting that message in that relationship that I was not valued, it was painful to hear. First, I did what a lot of people do with anxious attachment, which is try to find ways to win them back, try to find ways to remedy it. And honestly, if somebody wants to be with you, they're going to do everything they can to make it work. They're not going to have excuses for being too busy or anything. They're going to find ways. And when I was hearing things like, oh, I'm just busy with school, I'm just busy here and that, but yet this person was online all the time, they were hearting all these other women's photos, they would barely give me any compliments, it was clear where I stood. There was no sugarcoating it, but my little heart back then could not take it. And when they told me months before that to them there was no such thing as a break, to them a break is a breakup, but then they had the audacity to tell me the second time I asked them, because the first time I asked them, they made the excuse they were just so busy, and they would try to reach out. And the other thing was we weren't seeing each other a lot in person. But then the second time when they asked me for a break, that's when I knew it was over. But instead of, kind of like I do, my favorite exit strategy is to move in silence. So when he said he wanted a break, I said, okay. And I accepted it. I asked for a time frame. He didn't give me one. He just said, we'll play it by ear. And after that, we never spoke again. And the relationship was over. But see, this person did not respect me enough to give me any clarity. Because even someone who just even respects you as a person at least will be honest and upfront with you. If they don't think of you as valuable at all, they'll do whatever they want. The same way when I was a coach and I went to Go Lives, and sometimes I would help nurses, doctors, and I'd be in the hospital, and people felt they could talk down to me because of their position, or they didn't think there was any consequence. And I realized people treat you usually how they feel about you, whether it's a good or bad perception. You don't have to accept the disrespect. And people also project onto you whatever worldview they have. Again, it doesn't mean it's reality or the truth, but you also have the ability to respond how you choose to respond. And before reacting, think about how you want to respond. I've had situations, I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked in government, I've worked in the private sector, I've been self-employed, and it's all different, but I've had disrespectful people on the phones in my face. I've had doctors yell at me. I've had homeless people yell at me. I've been spit on. And I've learned that, honestly, anger manifests the same regardless of how much zeros are in your bank account. And disrespect is disrespect regardless. And a lot of people expect you to lose your cool. A lot of people thrive on seeing you down. But one of the biggest ways to get even with someone who's trying to break you down is to simply be indifferent. And that's hard, but part of being indifferent is having your exit plan and setting boundaries. Like when I was a coach and I was on one of my last projects on my way out, I had a project in Canada, and the doctor got really angry at me. And she basically, she yelled at me and all that. And that's not the first time that something like that's happened. And I remember after that, I was like, I'm sorry you feel that way. I was only asking you because the nurse practitioner wanted me to clarify with you. And after that, I just kind of went out around and see if anyone needed help. I would leave her alone, give her her distance, because it was clear she did not want my help at all. And that's fine. I have no problem when someone shows their true colors moving away from that. But I know I'm getting a little off topic here, but boundaries, exit strategy. As a Christian, I pray about everything, even opportunities that seem like they're good. I pray about everything. When I was going to move, I prayed about providing the right place that fits our needs. Whenever I was leaving that relationship, I prayed about it. Whenever I was dealing with leaving that job and getting a new job, I thought I had another job lined up. That fell through. I was so sad. I was like, God, and I asked him if it was his will. And I knew if I asked that it may not work out. But ironically, after I remember being on the 405 heading back to my hotel in LA traffic, and I was so heartbroken that I wasn't going to get the job because I was tired of being a coach. And then the next day, literally, a job that I had applied for got back to me. And this was back in July, and it was now October. And this honestly was a better fit because now I'm remote and I'm technical. I don't have to go to the office. I get to use more of my technical skills, so I like it better. But praying on it's so important. And the reason I wanted to do this video is just because I wanted to share some words of wisdom, some words of encouragement, because some of you out there may be feeling stuck in your situation, whether it's your living situation, your relationship. It doesn't have to be romantic, but begin to pray on it, do your research, plan your exit strategy, maintain boundaries, move in silence. I'm telling you, that's the best way to get out of a situation. And then it's crazy because what feels impossible one day, you look back on it once you make it out and you're just so grateful. Like Thanksgiving literally was yesterday, and I thought about how I'm grateful for all of the times that God gave me the strength to walk away, because I am not an extrovert. I'm not very outspoken. I might sound outspoken in a video. I'm very soft-spoken. A lot of people feel that they can trample on me because of my demeanor, but even if I am quiet and I'm mild-mannered, it doesn't mean that I don't have a backbone. And one thing God has taught me is to have a backbone when I didn't want to. So I hope you enjoyed this word of encouragement in a video, and you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care, and God bless.